Hello, I'm Bruce DuPoint. Coming up today on Newstalk, the spasm of violence now taking place in D.C. Is it the proliferation of synthetic drugs that's causing this uptick in crime, or is it something else? And do police have the right strategy for restoring calm? Also, the return of streetcars to D.C. is now 2 years behind schedule. Why the long delay? And should the city rethink plans to expand streetcars beyond H Street? And with Boston unexpectedly dropping out of the running for the 2024 Olympic Games, should the Washington region renew its bid? We'll discuss these issues and others. Your calls, too, with Ward 5 D.C. Councilman Kenyan McDuffie. Then, a conservative lawmaker from North Carolina takes on Speaker John Boehner, seeking to have the Speaker's position declared vacant. It's a move that hasn't been attempted in more than 100 years. Insight from Benton Ives, congressional editor for Politico.
From News Channel 8, this is Newstalk with Bruce DuPoint.
The midweek edition of the show, Wednesday, everybody. Hello and welcome. We've got a great lineup, and it's great to have you here today. As we come on the air, New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick is preparing to talk to the media. He will be asked by reporters many questions, no doubt, about the NFL's suspension of his star quarterback Tom Brady. Whether he answers in any substantive way is, of course, anybody's guess. When Belichick steps to the microphone, we'll bring you his remarks. But up first for you this time, the chairman of the D.C. Council's Committee on Judiciary, Ward 5 D.C. Councilman and Democrat Kenyan McDuffie. Thanks very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Good to have you here.
Always a pleasure.
There's a lot going on. We'll open the phones in a couple of moments to give people a chance to speak with you. In terms of public safety, we are not by a long shot where we were back in the day when crack was such a huge problem, when we were the murder capital, and when it seemed like, and in fact there was, on average, a murder or more a day. So to keep all of this in perspective, we're not where we were. But it doesn't feel as though we're in as good a place as we were, say, a year ago. What did the numbers say about where D.C. is right now crime-wise?
Well, the numbers say that violent crime is up 2%. It says that homicides in the District of Columbia are up 21%. We've got a total of 82 homicides as of last night, and so we're up 21% over where we were last year. And although we aren't seeing as much violence and homicides as we did when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I don't think it matters a lot to the victims and the families of the victims, of the folks who've been on the receiving end of violent crimes in the District of Columbia. And so we're not pleased with where we are, and obviously we're working really hard, myself along with Mayor Bowser, as well as the other public safety officials, including Attorney General Carl Racine and Chief Lanier, to try to address these serious issues that we're seeing.
What's going on?
Well, we're seeing a number of things. Typically you see a spike like we've seen this year around the summer months. And we've seen it historically in the District of Columbia. We're also seeing, and I've had conversations with the chief, we're seeing crime increase, violent crime in particular, increase across the country in major urban cities, whether it's Chicago, whether it's St. Louis. I mean, wherever you look, you've seen the spike in crime. Obviously not an excuse for what we're seeing, but we've got to really address this issue more comprehensively, Bruce. We can't just simply look at law enforcement and say we need more police. I don't think the answer is more police. I think the answer is smarter policing, more efficient policing, and building better community trust between the police and the residents of the District of Columbia.
What are the factors beyond law enforcement itself that would bring progress in this area?
Yeah, so when I look at crime, I look at obviously what MPD is doing and what the other law enforcement agencies are doing in the District of Columbia, but I also look at other indicators, education, where we are with education, where we are with employment. We've got about a 7% unemployment rate here in the District of Columbia. And we've got 8.4% unemployment rate in Ward 5, the area that I represent. And then when you get into Ward 7 and 8, you're talking about 11% and 13% respectively. And so that's obviously an issue. And to me, that helps to contribute to some of the crime that we're seeing. We also have a graduation rate for African Americans in the District of Columbia of 59%, where we see a graduation rate for white students of 85%. And I think that disparity speaks to some of the really deep-seated issues that we're dealing with, that I think that if we can improve the education system and create more opportunities economically for our residents, then I think we cut down on the individuals who are resorting to crime.
Have you had discussions with the chief or with other city leaders about synthetic drugs?
Absolutely.
To what extent are they in our communities in a serious way? To what extent is there a tie, a link between the increase in availability in this type of drug and the crime we're seeing?
The synthetic drugs have been really a problem in the District of Columbia as well as the region. We have seen more use. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, I'm chatting with him about some of the things that he's seen when he does the autopsies of folks who lose their life. We're seeing a number of individuals, including some in the homeless population. In recent weeks, we saw several overdoses throughout the District of Columbia, and we've been really trying to crack down on that. To that end, the council passed emergency legislation that Mayor Bowser sent down to us just a couple of weeks ago to address the synthetic drug problem that we have in the District of Columbia. And what it's going to do is going to stiffen the penalties for businesses that possess or distribute synthetic drugs. And we've already shut down one business. Carl Racine, the Attorney General, he went before the courts and actually got a closure of one particular troublesome store in Ward 5, a closure of that store for 1 year, which we're really pleased about. And so it's going to increase the fine such that if the first offense, you can be closed down for up to 96 hours and get a $10,000 fine. For any subsequent offenses, you can be closed down for up to 30 days and receive a $20,000 fine. So I think giving MPD and the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs the tools that they need to really enforce this and giving the Attorney General and others the tools that they need as well. And I've also talked to Mr. Cohen, who's the acting Assistant United States Attorney in the District of Columbia, who is working really hard on some of the higher profile criminal cases to prosecute as well.
Phone lines open as we talk this Wednesday with D.C. Councilman Kenyan McDuffie, a Democrat from Ward 5. He chairs the Council's Committee on Judiciary. You've got public safety under your committee.
Absolutely.
Phone lines open if you have questions or concerns or suggestions about this topic or other topics that we're likely to hit on, or just anything that's a priority for you right now. Join the conversation. We're able to take calls in the 10 a.m. hour. Hope you'll join the Q&A at 703-387-1020. That's our number. Go to the phones now. We'll take your calls as they come in. Again, 703-387-1020 is our number. Do you have a sense from talking to the chief or with others about where these drugs are coming from, how they're changing hands locally, and is it the price? Is it the drop in price or the affordability, if you will? It may sound funny to hear that term, use that term, but is the affordability of these drugs that's fueling the frequency of their use?
Sure, that's part of the problem. I mean, when you talk about synthetic drugs, they aren't as expensive as some of the other drugs that we've seen on the streets of the District of Columbia. We've had a horrible problem with heroin. We had a horrible problem with PCP. And synthetic drugs are much more insidious, if you will, Bruce, because a lot of the people who are consuming these drugs don't understand how damaging they could be to their bodies. I mean, we're talking about potentially life-threatening drugs on the streets that are easy to get in corner stores around the city.
Hold that thought for just a moment. Stand by, Councilman, if you would. We want to take you now to the press conference we referenced a moment ago. Bill Belichick, the coach of the New England Patriots, talking and no doubt being asked about the suspension of star quarterback Tom Brady. Let's listen in. Welcome back to News Talk here on News Channel 8 and our conversation this Wednesday with D.C. Councilman Kenyan McDuffie. Phone lines open if you have questions or comments for the chairman of the D.C. Council's Judiciary Committee. Our number here, for those of you watching in the 10 o'clock hour, 703-387-1020. Talking before the break and before the Patriots press conference about what we're seeing in the city in the public safety area and with synthetic drugs. You have a town hall meeting coming up in about 24 hours time.
I do. Tomorrow at 6:30 at New Samaritan Baptist Church, which is located in Trinidad on Florida Avenue. We're going to have a crime summit. We're going to have a number of officials from the public safety cluster here in the District of Columbia there on hand to answer questions of residents about what's happening with the crime in the District of Columbia, if there are questions about specific cases, also about community policing and things that residents can do to better engage and assist in solving some of these crimes. And so I'm really interested in making sure that we get this done, that we bring these officials to the community so we can hear directly from residents.
Do you feel that MPD is responding to what's going on in the streets right now? Is some of the issues you raised earlier, understandably, have a crime and safety connection, and they're longer term? In the short term, do you have confidence in MPD?
I do. I have confidence in the chief and MPD. I know that they're working really hard. I am in close contact with a number of officials and commanders throughout the Metropolitan Police Department, and I think they're working really hard. I know that there are concerns about how we respond to crime. I think MPD is really doing a yeoman's job of trying to respond to crime, but we've got to do a better job of actually preventing crime in the first place, and that really is where my focus is, in working with the current administration to try to do more of that.
To the phones, line one first. Hello, Roxy in Damascus. Thanks for calling. You're on the air. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I'm just curious if you're looking into the amount of officers that are leaving the Metropolitan Police Department. A lot of them are leaving due to retirement, but they're leaving to go to other jobs. It's not retirement that they're actually going to go into. They just don't like working for this administration. We have new officers that are leaving every day in droves to go to other agencies nearby for better pay, more stable workplace. Is anybody even checking into that?
Thank you. Is that something that's on your radar?
Absolutely. We had performance oversight hearings with the Metropolitan Police Department earlier this year where we asked specifically about attrition, the number of retirements, and it's deeply concerning. And the chief, she answered the tough questions that I asked, and she also talked about some of the things that they're doing to address that issue, like the civilian hires. They're going to be hiring a number of civilians to the Metropolitan Police Department so we can get some of the officers who are currently performing those duties out of the office and onto the streets. They also have a retention program that they've implemented in MPD to try to keep more of the officers on the force. It's important for residents to recognize when you come to the Metropolitan Police Department and you work in the District of Columbia, you get great experience, which makes you highly attractive to other police departments around the country. And so there is some incentive for officers to leave MPD and go elsewhere. We can't always really attribute that they're leaving to something that's happening in MPD. We are asking those tough questions about why they're leaving, and we're getting a mixed bag as to why that's happening.
So some of it apparently is attractive offers from perhaps neighboring agencies. What other factors are you hearing about?
Well, I think other factors are the quality of life that they have, working a lot. There's a lot of violence in the District of Columbia. It requires a lot of overtime. I know the chief has officers working a lot of overtime right now. The All Hands on Deck, the summer initiative that MPD generally implements, should be implemented next month. So there are a host of issues that I think contribute to officers who retire and leave early. And obviously we need to get more to the bottom of what the precise issues are. I know that there are programs that are currently being implemented to try to address it, and I'm going to be watching closely to see how the civilian hires work out to fill those certain jobs so we can cut down on overtime, but also the retention program that's going to be implemented to try to keep more officers on the force.
We'll go back to the phones as more of your calls come in. If you have a question or comment in the public safety area or dealing with some other aspect of life in the District of Columbia, do join the conversation. We've posted the number to the bottom of the screen, 703-387-1020. That's how you join the conversation. As I say, we'll go back to the phones as more of your questions and comments come in. This is not something your committee deals with, but I know it's something you're aware of. The long delay in reestablishing streetcars in the District of Columbia. Former Mayor Gray said for quite a long period of time, they're coming. We'll get through the testing soon, and folks will be able to ride streetcars in the District of Columbia. What is going on?
Well, that's a great question, and I know that earlier this year, Mayor Bowser said that she obviously supported that program and that she wanted to see it extended down to Georgetown. I've got to tell you, somebody who supports streetcars and was an early supporter, I am really losing confidence in the ability of the Department of Transportation and the contractor to actually get this done. We've invested millions upon millions of district dollars to try to get this system up and running. And if you ride down A Street today, you'll see operators on the streetcars. They're going back and forth. But we've got to get people in testing mode. And we've got to get people on the trains, get fares going, to try to, I think, restore residents' confidence of those who actually supported the program to begin with. I know there are a lot of businesses who are anxiously awaiting the arrival of the streetcar along 8th Street I've talked to some as recently as just last weekend. I was over at Starburst Plaza at the intersection of Bladensburg Road, 8th Street, and Benning, talking to Anwar Salim, who runs the 8th Street Main Street. And folks are anxiously awaiting the streetcar. But every day that goes by, Bruce, is a day that I lose more confidence in the ability to actually implement that program.
Compared to other modes of transportation, is there, and given what this arduous process that we've just come through, can the case still be made for streetcars? It's expensive. Backers of streetcars are very passionate about them, and they point to other cities and say, look at the neighborhood revitalization, and look at the investment that comes when local government signals that, you know, we're here for the long term, and because we're laying track and we're going to have this is something we're going to have going forward. But buses running up and down the street move people just as good, or I'll phrase it as a question. I mean, as you think about other neighborhoods of the city where streetcars have been at least part of the discussion for a second project, a third project, a fourth project, can the case still be made?
I think, again, more and more time that elapses, the tougher it is to make the case for streetcars. You've seen other jurisdictions, some in neighboring Virginia, ditch their plans to implement streetcars. And I gave an example to a resident the other day. It's almost like being in the middle of the ocean and trying to figure out whether you keep swimming to see if you see land on the other side, or you just decide to, you know, turn around and swim back to where you came from. And I think that's where the district finds itself right now, having invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this system and not to have it operate at this point. So I think the business community still is in strong support of the streetcars, particularly those businesses along 8th Street. But the more and more residents I speak to, the fewer and fewer I find who support streetcars.
There was a public safety question that I neglected to ask you. I want to double back to it. You have put some focus on dirt bikes and the use of ATVs on city streets, on sidewalks, and in alleys. Is the city making progress? How big a problem does this remain, and is the city making progress?
It's definitely a problem, particularly for residents who I've spoken to who have to deal with the noise and deal with these dirt bikes and ATVs riding up and down these major thoroughfares in the District of Columbia. I've seen it firsthand on streets like Rhode Island Avenue and North Capitol Street, and had to try to figure out a way to deal with it. MPD sort of had their hands tied, excuse me, because they have a don't chase policy that's implemented right now. And a lot of residents get frustrated that they see these ATVs ride past and MPD are sitting in their cruisers and they aren't doing anything about it. Well, Bruce, I support the no chase policy. I try to let residents know that I think it creates more of a hazard if MPD were to chase these vehicles. And so what we wanted to do is arm them with more tools. And so I introduced a bill that would enhance the penalties associated with riding these ATVs, and also would require, if passed, anybody who owns an ATV in the District of Columbia to actually register that vehicle with the Department of Motor Vehicles. And so we're going to stiffen the penalties. Right now it's a $250 fine, 30 days in jail. We're going to have a tiered system that goes all the way up to potentially 180 days in jail and a $1,000 fine.
Boston has unexpectedly dropped its bid for the 2024 Olympics. They were poised to be the U.S. OC choice, the U.S. Olympic Committee choice, after beating the other finalists, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and the Washington region. With Boston out, should the D.C. region renew its bid?
Well, that's a great question. I think that a lot of folks in the city right now are looking at that. I got to tell you, the concerns that have been raised with Boston in terms of the cost overruns is a serious concern that we should have an answer for in the district before we try to renew any effort to get the Olympics here.
The issue there, the concern at the end of the day was the notion of a blank check, that the city, maybe the region, would commit to something, and no matter what the cost rose to, you're on the hook financially. That's got to be baked into the cake.
Oh, absolutely. There's certainly benefits associated with having the Olympics here, and I love to see that day happen, but I want to have those tough questions answered before we make any type of commitment. The cost overruns are a serious issue. We got a lot of pressing problems, including affordable housing, education, crime, and other things in the district.
Kenyan McDuffie represents Ward 5 on the D.C. Council, chair of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you so much for being here today. Great
Thanks
to
for
see
having
you.
me, Bruce.
Enjoy the rest of your summer.
You do the same. Thank you.
We'll step aside, back with more News Talk here on News Channel 8 right after this.